What's going on, everybody? It's me, Asad Hashmali, back again with another episode of Behind the Grind. And this time we've got Nabeel Siddiqui with us. Nabeel, how are you?
Hi, Asad. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. So, Nabeel, the reason why I called you on this time to this episode was because when I saw you go live with your startup, that was actually my first exposure to the world of startups, and that too in Pakistan. And that's where I heard of Nest.io, and I found out that there's a whole other world out there of business that I just didn't know about, right? But for everyone who's listening, for everyone who's watching, Nabeel is the founder, is one of the co-founders of the startup called Modulus Tech, which builds housing for IDP, and they basically don't just make houses for IDPs or internally displaced people. They make houses and accommodation spaces, if you will, for all walks of life, for all sorts of people as well. And this started off because of the Syrian refugee crisis in 2016. Did I get that right, Nabil?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the inspiration behind the company. Now we're working in sustainable housing overall, um, globally, not just in Pakistan. Our primary markets are now affordable housing, but also some tiny houses and some tourism projects.
Interesting. Great, great. So, how about you? Let's start off with you actually sharing some context as to what is Modulus Tech, briefly about the starting phases, because what I want to understand is actually what the go-to market phase was like for Modulus Tech. 4 years ago, things were very different. The landscape was very different. So, over to you. Like, what were some
Yeah,
challenges that
so
come up?
honestly, it started off as a technological innovation more than anything, and then we thought, okay, let's commercialize this because this has a lot of potential to create impact. So we created a housing technology that makes it very quick to set up houses, but more importantly, very sustainable and cost effective. Which was a game changer for that market segment, because normally when you consider sustainability being incorporated into some products or especially housing, it becomes really, really expensive. So that's something we were really good at doing, is coupling economic and environmental sustainability. So that's how we started off, and we thought, okay, we've made the technology, it's going to solve huge problems, and governments and clients would love to buy this. Uh, there were more problems to it. There were a lot of barriers. So just making the technology wasn't enough. We had to figure out the entire cycle of delivering the houses to the end consumer. So initially, we uh, chased the governments and these humanitarian agencies, and it was either too political, or governments didn't have the kind of money, or they didn't have the kind of vision on how to do this properly. So after that, we went and partnered with some investors who wanted to invest in Pakistan and elsewhere. And even with that, the problem in the end, especially with respect to Pakistan, was how do you finance the end user, and how do you give investors that surety that their money will be returned. So we've really had to reinvent the cycle and look at this problem at a more holistic lens. So we've been able to solve a lot of challenges in that domain thus far.
Okay, so uh, you mentioned that you went to investors that were willing to put in their money in this space, right? So, but how did you manage to identify those individuals? Because your idea was for a particular group of people, right? It was more impact oriented. Who did you go to exactly? Like,
So uh, there are investors who invest specifically in affordable housing globally, and even when the government in Pakistan announced the Naya Pakistan housing programs, there were some very specific groups that wanted to invest 50,000 houses in Pakistan or other numbers, and there are quite a few people taking interest because it's a very good market from that perspective. Um, that there is definitely a supply shortage and there's huge demand. So instead of chasing the government, who was still figuring out at that time on how to do this, we went after those investors, and they loved the technology. Um, and we were able to partner with one of those investors in Pakistan, and we're doing our first project with them. Now, the problem there was that it's very easy to build houses for middle income groups or higher income groups. But what do you do about the bottom income pyramid? pyramid. So we're specifically targeting the bottom 40% of the income pyramid with our housing because that's part of the vision of the company. And the issue was you cannot mortgage housing to people who do not have salaried income or who live on daily wages. So just a lot of challenges we've faced in the whole cycle of delivering houses.
But mortgaging is a problem overall, right? In Pakistan, like I haven't really heard of any mortgage schemes as such for other income brackets. Do they exist over here?
There have been with HBFC, with a lot of banks, but no, it hasn't caught on that much.
Okay. So,
But but now with the new policies, things have changed.
okay, all right. So the way you're putting it is that you have a customer now who's kind of footing the bill, and you have an end user, right? Um, how do you, and maybe I'm jumping the gun over here, so clarify this a little bit for me as
Sure.
well. You got investment to start building these houses as well for those that needed it, or for the lower income bracket families in Pakistan. Um, how do you fill in that gap of showing some kind of running finances and some kind of revenue generation over here? The ones that are investing are
Um,
really living in those houses, and the ones that have to live in the houses can't afford that
that
as
is
well.
the tricky part of this problem entirely. So because of the involvement of mortgage companies now, this problem has been quite easy to solve actually, especially with the new policies of the government. So let's say we get a project financed by an investor. We buy the land, we build the houses. We find a mortgage company to finance those houses. The mortgage company now wants families to live in those houses in order for them to mortgage. As soon as they find those families, they pay us all the money. We return that money to the investors, give them their profits, and at the end of the day, the end user, which could be a family which has a household income of 40,000 rupees, is now able to afford a net zero energy house uh, at 15,000 rupees a month. And in a city like Karachi, that's how much they're paying in rent. So the entire thing works out. It makes a lot of sense for the end user. It makes sense for the investors. It makes sense for us to do it. So it's now started to finally work out. Yeah.
Okay, all right, interesting, interesting. So coming to you guys in the early days, right? Like I find that part, because you guys have been alive for 4 years now, right? Um,
Yeah.
I find the initial steps the most interesting, because now like everyone goes back to the likes of Google and Facebook to seek inspiration from them, and even Airbnb. But you guys were in a very different space. You guys entered the hardware business. You guys didn't enter the tech
Yeah.
space as such, right? um, Driving technology to innovate in the hardware space, yes, that's there. uh, but a larger chunk of your investment of the capital that you raise would go towards those materials. What assumptions did you enter with? uh, did you enter this startup with, and how did those assumptions change throughout? Like,
Oh gosh, so many. I think we've had a lot of pivots with our strategy, especially. So initially, like I mentioned, we thought that making a technology would solve the problem. We'd be able to sell to governments. Figured out we had to solve the entire uh, problem in the industry in this market segment as well. Second issue was, yes, it was hardware. We did have the chicken or the egg problems getting investors, and you don't have enough sales to show. And housing is something that takes a while to start. Especially with hardware, you do need to do a lot of testing. Typically, a hardware company would test their product for 3 years and then launch. We launched before, I think 6 months we were into
it's like you built
starting
your
the
first
company.
product and that was your test.
Yeah, and we were very lucky. We were able to get some grants that helped us test that technology, but then we didn't have the luxury of testing that product for the next 3 years. We had to start right away. So we started doing everything that we could find initially. We did labor housing, we did schools, we did clinics, we did sanitation projects. Uh, but that also helped us refine the technology, and we were able to test that our products in different environments based on that, which we might have not been able to do if we just stuck with housing. Um, so yeah, it worked out in the end. It was a long journey. It took some perseverance, but I think it worked out for the better. And we're still at a pace which is much faster than other hardware companies in terms of scaling and testing the technology itself.
So now, when I was going through your website, I saw that not only are these houses sustainable and environment friendly, they I there's a very interesting stat which I can't remember, but it's about how much you guys have reduced the carbon emissions in the past year, which I thought was pretty cool as well. And then you guys have integrated with the house being when you guys say sustainability or that the house is sustainable, you have a module to incorporate solar in there for water sanitation and for electricity as well, right? So how did was that like a pivot of some sorts for you guys, or was that just more of a you found a project, you thought that might as well experiment and let's add this on?
Yeah, so the sustainability aspect has been there from the get-go. Uh, but once we entered this market, we realized that developing countries like Pakistan, they don't have water or energy, uh, right? And if we wanted to provide proper living conditions to the end users, we needed both of those things. And the scale that we're looking at, if we build, let's say, even a million homes, we don't have enough water or energy in this country to provide them with. So yeah, that's how the idea of introducing off-grid products and incorporating that within the technology came about. Um, so yeah, so like I mentioned, you really have to think about the entire long-term strategy with this.
Hmm. So and as over the years now, also the product offerings changed, right? So
So we've
when
entered the tourism. Sorry, go ahead.
after you.
Yeah, so yeah, we've entered a couple of very interesting new markets. One of them that I really like and enjoy is the tourism space. So we're doing some projects up north. They're very unique, eco-friendly tourist resorts. And I personally like this project a lot because there's a lot of employment opportunities that we're creating um, for the locals over there. Another interesting space that we've started entering now is export products, especially more luxurious tiny houses. And we're doing our first exports to the US right now. And that's also very exciting because the products that we're creating use the same base structure, but they're used for different applications, different environments, and they meet the US building codes. So that's been quite exciting for the team from a technology perspective. And what all of this does is that it helps us further subsidize affordable housing in Pakistan. So that's quite exciting.
And with these new offers coming in as well, that means that um, you're getting, I'm assuming you're also getting more traction and more eyeballs as well, right? So, but with that expansion, I don't know, are you at that scale where with that expansion, you kind of have to outsource different areas or maybe like streamline your entire um, supply chain, maybe, or your processes?
That's
I don't know.
a
Tell me about that. Yeah.
that's a very intelligent question. Yeah, so initially when we started out, we were manufacturing everything in house. That allowed us to do a lot of R&D and also test different ways of manufacturing. And now we're creating some trade secrets in the manufacturing process itself. Um, but now, recently, we've been gaining a lot of traction, especially after 2020. It's been growing quite rapidly. Uh, we started outsourcing technology, and from being a very manufacturing intensive company, we've now become a very asset light company that outsources manufacturing to different partners. And that has sort of helped us scale really fast this year.
But
So yeah, we started off as a
has that given you control
Pardon?
though? Like because if you outsource your manufacturing, then does that mean that the margin of error goes higher because you're not the one implementing the tech on that, right?
Yeah, that was our initial concern with the outsourcing manufacturing. And we found some reliable manufacturers, but also we have supervisors who are constantly checking for quality, working with those manufacturers. We source the material ourselves, and works a bit like the automobile sector, where we outsource different components of the house. So no manufacturer is making the entire house themselves. They're doing what they're best at doing. Um, so that helps us navigate through these problems.
All right. Interesting. Interesting. Cool. So tell me a little bit about the scaling process as well. Like lately, I've been reading about blitz scaling, as I think every startup founder would have read about.
Yeah.
But what's it like for you right now? What's the chaos like, or the have you managed to make a very clear cut plan and a strategy that you're trying super hard to abide by, or is it just all over the place right now for you?
It's a bit of both. I'd be lying if I told you everything's under control. It is difficult scale, especially at this space. But no, it's going really well so far. We've been able to deliver projects on time. We've been able to keep customers happy, and that's what's most important. And the team is learning a lot, and now we're actually looking to scale the team as well in order to cater to the demands. So yeah, it is difficult and it is challenging, but it's a good challenge to have. Yeah.
So is there anything that's in the pipeline right now that might just be released in the second half of this year as well for you guys?
So we'll be launching the tourism project
Okay.
uh, in a few months and the export products very
Okay.
soon.
Sweet, sweet.
Yeah.
So, and I'm sorry, out of excuse my naivety as well, but for you guys, how does scaling, like when if you're expanding your team as well, what part of your team would a business like yours even be expanding towards, considering manufacturing is outsourced as well, and then the export side of things, I'm not really seeing the need for expansion in that team. Correct me if I'm wrong, but what areas are you focusing on in particular?
So yeah, there is like a lot of demand, but we're looking even further. We're looking at other countries. So there is a huge business development side of things that we want to work on. So focusing on places like Africa, but also for the tiny home market, we're focusing at Australia in the long run. We plan on creating a manufacturing software that helps us license the technology. So imagine it having a 3D printer, but you cannot use that 3D printer without our software. So that helps us keep control over our manufacturers in the long run. So hiring is a bit on the tech side, a bit on the product side as well, and a bit on the business development side, and then marketing, sales, and then just project managers to handle all these projects and work towards research as well. So
Interesting.
a bit of everything. Yeah.
Sweet, cool, cool. All right. Coming back to this tourism project as well, um, and I understand that in a country like Pakistan, uh, you have tourism up north especially. It's a circular economy. It helps. Everyone saw the amount of revenue generated from Naran and Kagan right now during Eid, but um, when that first opportunity came your way, or when someone kind of, I'm sure before the opportunity came, people must have suggested to you that why don't you expand in X industry or Y industry, or like collaborate with the prefab industry and work in industrialization. Sorry, not like, and work in the factory model as well for different industries. Did you ever feel like you were kind of cheating yourself, that you're going astray from the vision?
Yeah, that is another really good question. Yes, because other markets that were available for our technology were very easy to get into versus the one that our vision was towards. And we didn't say no to different markets. We did work in them, but we kept our vision aligned somehow throughout the long run. Now, while the affordable housing space took us a while to figure out how to work around that. We were working in other spaces, so the technology was being used, it was being tested, it was getting improved in that cycle. We didn't just sit back, and at the same time, we were reaching out to potential investors, meeting those government officials, identifying the challenges in the affordable housing space as well, and then just working on solving those problems. So that all took a while, but in the meantime, we kept the business running with these other projects, and yeah, a lot of other business opportunities that seemed very lucrative. Um, and now we start expanding into them as well. But affordable housing would be our primary market in the long run. It's the biggest volume market for us as well.
And that's still your North Star, like making sure
Yeah.
the impact you wanted to generate does get generated.
Yeah, but it also makes business sense. The numbers that we're looking at in affordable housing won't be there in other markets. So in the long run, it still makes sense to stick to that North Star.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Interesting. All right. So you and your buddies, you guys were from NUST, right?
Anything.
NED.
Yeah, civil engineering.
Completely civil engineering. Yeah, completely um, non-business background, right? Uh,
Absolutely.
how was it like? And considering that you were at your startup was incubated at Nest, um, how were those first interactions like for you? Because um, I'm not going to say that I am going into a conversation with an investor and trying to lay out a cap table as well and figure out what the term sheets should look like. But how is it like for you getting exposed to this whole new world that you probably, I don't know if you even thought about it, but what was it like?
Honestly, like we were just really passionate about doing this and solving this problem. We were very inexperienced, and then we were very nervous also that are we going to do this or not, and there were a lot of risks for us at that point. Um, but then we entered the space. We were really lucky to have a great mentor like to guide us through. And being very inexperienced, I think we spent a lot of time just learning new things about business, about strategy, about managing teams, about culture. Um, yeah, so and we're still learning a lot of things, but I think the initial 2 years we had a lot of learning, and we had to do everything ourselves as well. So yeah, it was definitely a challenge, but yeah, I think that my team has been really good at learning new skills, which has really helped us in this process.
All right, fair, fair. And like, how do you think the space has evolved over time? Because like millions of dollars have come in, which I don't know is either we were slow at acquiring all this funding from the West, or it's now our time. I don't know, but how do you
Yeah.
feel that the space has changed overall since you entered it?
So when I entered the space, getting $100,000 investment was a huge deal when you had made it as a startup. And now I think getting $1 million isn't that big of a deal. So I think it's great how the ecosystem is growing and investors have more confidence, especially all the foreign investors coming into Pakistan. I think that's really, really nice to see.
Mm-hmm. But do you think there's something that needs to change or something that needs to improve also in this space?
I would say collaboration between the investors and stakeholders in the ecosystem themselves. There seems to be a lot of competition, and I don't think uh, that's ideal for the ecosystem. I think we need to grow together and help each other. So that's what I would like to say.
Interesting, fair, fair. So if you met some startup founders right now, like, is there something? Do you mentor any like founders yourself?
Not officially and not as an expert, but yes.
Yeah. So like,
um,
what's
but
that
it's more of a
like?
discussion, just bouncing off ideas.
Fair.
So you were saying something?
But yeah, like what would you is there some like suggestion or some piece of advice that you'd like to give to anyone who's planning to start something off themselves?
I would tell them to really understand the business and have a great team before entering the market, and not just do that because startups are trendy or it's something that you think would be very cool, but something you can commit to in the long run and see yourselves working hard towards the next 5, 6, 7 years. So it's a long journey. It's a difficult journey. I think you need to be prepared for that and
Yeah.
be ready to take it on that way.
Fair. Cool, cool. And I always have this one question that
Yeah.
I ask every guest, but I'm gonna ask that question after this one because I feel like you might have a very interesting take on this. My observation of this entire of this startup space, or of, for the lack of a better word, for folks from our generation who are trying to set up a business or a startup, or are even exploring the ecosystem as a whole, see it from a very la di da, sexy kind of perspective. Whereas I feel that it's not rainbows and butterflies. There's a lot of hardships, there's a lot of challenges that come in along the way. And I feel that if you are trying to get into, if you do want to, build your own business, let's call it a business and not a startup just for a bit, is if you do want to build something like that, then how are you going to build it to last? And are you willing to get married to it as well? That's the way I see it. Do you have that same perspective? And I understand that exit strategies are important too. You have to, like, build it and then also know when to hand it over to someone else. But do you have a similar perspective in that regard, or are you just like, one business
Yeah,
for rest of your
that's
life?
something I've really thought about, and I wish to take the company to a scale where I'm not able to run it, where we would need to get other more qualified people to run it, more experienced people to run it, and that's what we aim to do. But again, yes, it depends how well we grow ourselves as individuals uh, and how capable we are. That's a very interesting question. Yeah, but in the starting out, we were all in about getting married to the company, or looking at it from a long-term perspective and putting in those hours that are required,
Hmm.
not just for a year, but it's been now 4 years, and it is a lot of hard work. It's not rainbows and butterflies, like you said. So yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people glamorize now. And I'm not sure if it should be that way, but somehow it ends up being that way if you want to scale a company.
Hmm.
Not sure it's ideal for everyone. But yeah, if it works for you, then it's good.
Yeah, and to be very honest, when we had our previous conversation also, and you were sharing the numbers of the average income group in Pakistan, your challenges with big organizations. I won't take the name right now, but like massive organizations from all around the world. Those challenges also, those conversations. Your first challenge is getting your foot in the door. The second challenge is actually continuing a conversation as well, and the third challenge is being able to walk out of that conversation or saying goodbye to that conversation as well. And in the
Yeah.
space you're at, kudos to you for still, like, being in it and not giving up as well. That's commendable. If anything, working with government organizations in Pakistan is no joke.
We've been lucky, and we've had a lot of great people supporting us.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I don't know. We just made it happen somehow.
Great. Awesome.
Um,
um, you were saying something, sorry.
yeah, sorry, go ahead. That's fine.
So looking back at the past, at day zero and to where we are today, where do you see Modulus Tech 5 years from now?
If you had asked me that 3 years ago, I wouldn't imagine we'd be here. And I hope that I can't imagine right now where we'd be in 5 years in a good way. um, but we see ourselves spread out in various locations, and being the pioneers in sustainable housing globally. And we're on that track right now. So I think the future looks good. Right.
All right, great. And my final question to you is, Nabeel, if you could go back in time and meet your younger self, what would you say to him?
I would say keep doing the same things because I wasn't very focused. Um, well, I was more curious as a child, and that got me interested. That got me experiences in very different things, and I think that really helps me now, more than getting those grades or just being just working all the time, just making friends. I think that was great what I did, and I think it's what makes me this way. So I wouldn't change that. Yeah. But
Awesome.
what about you? What do you think?
No one's
What would
asked
have
me
you
that.
told your younger self?
Wow. Firstly, thank you for asking me. You're the 19th guest, and finally someone asked me. I haven't thought about it. I think I would say pretty much the same thing, is that
Yeah.
uh, just trust the process and go easy on yourself, I guess. You know?
Yeah, perhaps have a bit more confidence that things are gonna work out, and just enjoy life and learn things. Really, yeah. I
100%.
think
Yeah, because
I think that's the
everyone
way to
has their
go.
own stories and their own journeys to go through and to experience. You know, my brother, one of the biggest qualms I had with him was he would try to um, tell me what to do and what not to do, and my answer would be, let me figure it out myself. And I think that's, I value that even more, going through those experiences and those hardships by yourself, figuring it out.
Definitely. And I think what you're doing right now is quite impressive.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
That's yeah. Love
That means
to
a lot.
hear more on that in another episode.
Yes.
Maybe we could
So
get some
that's
other people to interview you, and we could hear your stories.
now you're just being too kind, man. You're gonna make me blush on my own show right now.
Yeah.
No, but
No, I last time you were mentioning what you're doing, and I think that's quite exciting.
thank you, man. Really appreciate it. And thank you for taking out the time, man. This was a great conversation, super valuable. And do you have any final words that you'd like to share with anyone who's listening or watching?
Um, Not really. If they've made it through so far, I'm sure they've
So I cut this up.
had
So
to
if
bear
there's
with me
something
quite a
really great,
lot.
if there's
Yeah.
some goal that you'd like to share, I cut this up and I put this out there for everyone.
Um, I would just say that, just focus on what makes you happy and uh, where you find your own passion. And I think you make a positive impact to society if you're following your own heart. So yeah, that's all I'm gonna say.
Great. Awesome. Awesome. Nabeel, thank you so much for your time. This was a great conversation. For all those listening, that was Nabeel Siddiqui speaking on social entrepreneurship. Could we call Modulus Tech in as a
Yeah,
company in the
you
social
put.
entrepreneurship space? Yeah, awesome. Great. I'm going to put Nabeel's link and his website link in the description as well. I've been following it for a very long time. I've been following Modulus Tech and all of his interviews for a very long time. So it's great to see the journey you guys are at. More power to you and all the very best for whatever you guys set yourselves out to.
Thank you, sir. Likewise, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for doing this and having me. Yeah, thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Till the next one, everybody. Take care. Bye bye.